The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to, oh, sorry, I just stepped on my feet. Mike, go ahead.
Okay, I just want to remind everyone that this meeting is being recorded and will be probably posted on the internet. Okay, Tom.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. Let's go ahead with the order that's in our agenda and start off by approving the minutes. Thank you, Samantha, for your excellent minute taking. I did not see any comments or any corrections from my end. Did anyone have any comments for the minutes?
No.
Okay, we're going to do this by hand wave then. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting?
So moved.
And a second, please.
Okay.
All in favor? We're just going to do this by hand wave, and most of the other folks I think are probably abstaining because you weren't there last time. So we are going to record that as a unanimous vote. First thing we want to do today is welcome the new folks who've joined us. We have 5 new citizen at large members, and we also have a new representative from the school committee. And so what I thought we could do is just start off by asking each of them just to give a quick sentence or two background about sort of your experience in town and what brings you to this committee. We'll have plenty of chances to hear from you more, but I just want to make sure people have a chance to put a name with the face. And let me see, do we see Augustina yet? I don't see Augustina. I was thinking we had everybody. Scott, do you have Augustina's email handy? Would it be possible for you, or I just want to make sure that she's...
Yep, I'll put in the background.
Okay. Why don't we go ahead and get started then? And I'm going to ask Jeff to go first.
Okay, great. I wanted to make sure I didn't speak into a muted mic again. So, okay. So anyway, so I've been in town here for 7 years, and it was a pretty turbulent summer, as we all know. And as I listened to the meeting a few weeks ago, actually Scott had mentioned the idea of bringing faith leaders in, and since May, I've actually been working in a similar capacity as the president of the Lowell Interfaith Group. And so I thought, since this is something I'm working on elsewhere too, I may as well do it here at home as well. So I decided to jump in, and I'm excited to participate. I think this is going to be a really good dialogue, a really good place to participate and to give some time back.
Thanks, Jeff. And if you haven't had a chance to congratulate Jeff yet, Jeff has also been appointed to the Finance Committee.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask Emily to go next, please.
Hi, I'm Emily Gilstrap. I've been in Westford for just over 2 years, and I am really passionate about education and mental health. I have worked as an educator with kids with various needs, and have seen a lot of issues surrounding mental health, and so this is really important to me. And since being in Westford, I've done a lot of activism and worked with the community to promote various, to support various members of the community. So I'm happy to be here.
Great, thank you. Welcome, Emily. Maybe on the educator theme, Carolyn, could you go next?
Yes, I have lived in Westford for 27 years. This is my adopted hometown. I lived here longer than I lived in my own hometown. And over the years, I've served on several boards and committees, and I usually try to ask to be involved in committees that I think I could actually try to contribute to, or that I am very passionate about. And this one actually fulfills both. I'm interested and passionate as an educator, and just one who is very concerned about the social emotional well-being of all of our children in Westford. And I feel like, having worked with kids at the elementary, the middle school, and having grown-up kids at this point, I think that I'm hoping to contribute to this committee in a positive way.
Great, thank you and welcome. And if, in case everyone doesn't know, what you're Carolyn by day, you're
I'm an assistant principal at the NAB and the Abbott.
okay. Thank you very much. Omar.
Thank you. I'm Omar. I'm a software engineer at the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory, and I'm a new addition to the Westford community. I bought a house here 2 years ago, and I'm here to stay. And by the way, let me stress that I'm Italian. I'm not a citizen yet, even though I'm working on it. I'm a permanent resident, and as soon as possible, I'll apply for citizenship. And I brought it up because I want to thank you for this opportunity in particular, because usually permanent residents are not represented or cannot represent their town. And so I particularly appreciate the opportunity that you're giving me to participate in the committee. When we lived in Arlington, one of my sons was going to the preschool there, and I was exposed to, since they were sharing the building with the high school, they were having the security, the kind of security drills that they have in the high school, and that was a little bit overwhelming. And I found myself researching a lot about this topic, and that's where I started to gain interest in the kind of topics that the task force is addressing. And since I'm now here for the long run, I'm here to stay. I'm happy to participate and to give back and to contribute to the community. So thank you again for this opportunity.
Good, thanks, Omar. You're very welcome here. Augustina is the other citizen at large. I don't see her here. She may have had a late-breaking conflict. Hopefully she'll join us. If not, I'll connect with her offline and make sure she has the same content that you do. And Valerie will be taking our school committee spot. And Valerie, maybe just introduce yourself real quick.
Hi, my name is Valerie Young. I was elected to the school committee at the most recent election. I have a rising second grader and a preschooler, and I'm just looking forward to learning a lot and contributing where I can.
Good, thank you. So where are we with this effort? We have spent 2 years working together, looking at a lot of different aspects of both physical security and then increasingly social and emotional wellness and what set of recommendations we want to make there. We are getting to the point, probably not after this meeting and maybe a couple more meetings yet, where we want to engage the community and share some of what we've learned, sort of talk about some of the options that we've developed, and then sort of get a sense of priority from the community about what set of recommendations we should ultimately make to the select board and the school committee. So we've made a lot of progress. I think today what I was hoping to do is just go through the format, maybe do a quick pass through the presentation, and then come back and get your feedback about what kind of questions you anticipate the public having, if there are things you think are unclear, if you've seen content before that's really valuable that you think would help tell the story. I think what we'll do is over the next couple meetings, probably we'll refine this and fill in the content. And when we all feel like we're ready, we'll begin to engage the public in a series of public meetings. I'll mention that school leadership appropriately is focused on making sure that we're getting ready for school, and so they're not able to join us today. I think we'll probably focus on completing the presentation over the next couple of weeks and then get back together again when they are able to engage with the committee because they've got such an important voice and such an important part of what this is. So what I thought I would do is do a walkthrough at some speed of the deck, just to set the stage. So this is going to be, probably an hour and a half or 2 hour public, meeting. There's a lot of information to cover. So at this point, all ideas are good ideas. We can add whatever we want to the presentation, but just to frame it, I think we'll want this kickoff presentation to be like 45 minutes maybe. So we've got plenty of time to talk and share. And if it turns out we can't do that, we may have to expand the format, but just to give you a sense, I'm going to hop over and share my screen. Mike, if you can take a look at the questions and other things that come up as we go, I want to make sure we're.
Yep, I'll keep my eye on it for you.
You can see my screen. Okay. Can you see what I'm sharing now?
Yes.
Okay. Great. So part of this is what I just discussed. I just want to bring people in to when the committee was formed and under what circumstances. The next phase, this just describes what the goal of the meeting would be. And again, we want to share what we've learned about the areas of greatest need, look at potential approaches that we've received, either developed ourselves or received from consultants, and then get a sense of urgency and priority amongst the options that we have. So in the end, we're going to go to the different boards and say, this is what we've heard, this is what we think the needs are, and based on the community, this is how we prioritize the first steps we take, the second steps, the third steps, et cetera. So there are 4 areas of need that get covered here. One is social and emotional well-being. We'll cover that. Another is a set of resources to really support the whole town. So families, adults, elders, in particular, domestic violence, substance abuse, and self-harm. The reason that this committee was kicked off and a lot of the work that's been accomplished already relates to training and preparedness for an external threat. And then a couple times, and certainly in the climate that we are in today, we want to make sure we've got strong cultural competence around minority population groups, including the ones listed here. We learned in our studies that these groups have different needs. They see and interact with different elements that we're talking about here differently. So we want to make sure that every step along the way we're taking the lens of cultural competence and making sure that we're being thoughtful about how the steps we take affect everybody. This is a lot of data that you've seen before. What I was hoping to do here is give just a slide or two of why we think the social and emotional well-being is so important and so urgent. I think when I was on the school committee, I was shocked by a lot of this data. And the main point here is for people to understand that we are seeing an increasing increasing level of distress with really early grades. The recommendation that we're leading up to is that we add there. So we want people to understand that if they're not familiar with this already, that we're seeing a lot of concern in particular with middle school and younger. Also, we see social and emotional well-being show up in the adult population. We'll see in a later slide, but 27% of our seniors report symptoms of depression. So it's a really important group that we need to focus on there as well. We're going to come back, as mentioned before, we're going to kind of shoot through this and then come back for comments and questions. So I know you may have many questions, and we'll make sure we get to them. Just putting some numbers to it. So, percentages can seem small, but we're talking about a lot of kids. If we're talking about suicidal ideation and attempted suicide, you can see here that 68 students in Westford Academy reported a suicide attempt. That's a huge number. And 10 sixth graders reported a suicide attempt in 2018. So big numbers, really important area for us to focus. This is a lot more data, probably impossible to present in a group, but it's useful background for people to have. A lot of this comes out of the Youth Risk Behavior Survey that's done either every year or every 2 years, I think, in the schools. But lots of background there. The primary approach that has come out of both the consultant report that we've done and the internal study that we've done is to look at adding additional adjustment counselors at the younger levels. And so the concept here, or the discussion topic, would be to place a mental health professional at each of the 6 elementary and primary schools. And then what impact does this have? In our last meeting, people made an excellent point that we really need to paint a picture for people about what would be different. And Carrie is working on this, and I appreciate her help with this. I think this will include things like the ability to do universal mental health screening, the ability to have resources available for younger kids, particularly for mental health care. A lot of the resources that we have are really important and do a lot of valuable things, but are often stretched and committed to many different tasks at once. So on this slide, we would, sort of explain what would happen early in the screening, explain the kind of intervention that people could expect, and just sort of explain what the world would be like if we were able to do this. Next, we're going to transition to risks to Westford's elders, adults, and families. And Jeff and his team are working on pulling together some facts to help us sort of get a sense of scope around what we're seeing related to domestic abuse, substance abuse, self-harm, and suicide. I know Jeff is working on pulling this together. These numbers Jeff has shared some of these numbers with me in the past. These numbers surprised me how high they are, how many suicide deaths we've had in town over the past 4 or 5 years. So I don't have them on the slide today, but that will be something that we highlight here. The Healthy Aging Collaborative does a bunch of survey work. This is just, a couple interesting facts that you can see. What is going on in the slide is we're looking at how things look in Westford and then how they look in the state. I don't get a lot of comfort out of the better columns because some of these numbers are really high. So if 27% of our population over 65 is experiencing symptoms of depression, I want to make sure that we're attentive to serving that group and that population well. The one number that does pop out as being higher is in this survey, the over 60 population reports excessive drinking at a higher level than you typically would see at the state. So just something for us to keep our eyes on, and just acknowledge that that's at least what came out in this survey and this data. So one approach here that's been suggested by consultants and things we've seen in other towns is to pull together a lot of the resources with a town-wide wellness coordinator. So this would be a full-time position, someone who probably has some sort of licensed social worker background, but is really there to help us tie all the resources that we have together, help us stay current with the resources available from the state, and making sure that across all the different departments in town, we're creating linkages. Also, there's a number of ongoing groups in town that are really valuable, like the Domestic Abuse Council working group that was formed. I think having someone in a leadership position at the town level to help make sure that those meetings keep going, make sure they get the resources they need, would really help all the different individual threads that are already in place be more successful. So what impact would this have? This could have, basically developing all the resources that are available at the community and state level. It could support the community groups that are already in place and make sure they've got resources and are tying together. And it could create some bridges between town resources and school. In our last meeting, we had a lot of discussion about how young adults will graduate out of the Westford schools into being a citizen in Westford, and a lot of the support that they've been used to doesn't travel with them. They basically leave the system, and now they're in a totally new environment. And that is a particularly at-risk group that we want to make sure we're focusing on. So this is sort of some of the things that might be benefits if we're able to have this town coordinator in place. On the physical safety side, we worked extensively with a consultant called Guideposts. They identified 3 areas of risk, and 2 of them were really facilities related, and the others related to personnel. The 3 are emergency communication, access control, and additional SRO presence. I just want to take a step back and celebrate the security working group that did a lot of excellent work in the buildings, looking at ways that we can make sure that buildings have better access control and better communication. This was a very successful working group that since has put forward and had approved by the town at town meeting a number of important investments that we'll discuss in a second. The main physical security recommendations related to emergency communication and access control. Before, it was not the case that you could necessarily communicate successfully from inside some of the schools to outside some of the schools. If you've ever been in Westford Academy, you may know what I'm talking about. There were a lot of the classrooms were not individually addressable, so there was not a way to talk to a specific teacher. There was not a way for that communication to happen from other locations besides the school office, which is a real problem. So there were a number of significant issues related to our ability to communicate and respond in an event, and many of those things have been addressed. The second principal recommendation was making sure we've got control of who's in the building. And so there's a number of access control measures that are being implemented here as well. A third that we'll talk about is classroom doors. If you've had students that have gone through some of the drills in the schools, there's not a very good way right now for a classroom in a safe, secure way to be able to do a lockdown. And that's a strong recommendation from the consultants in an area for us to focus on. I'll probably find a better way to communicate because I'm sort of a little bit redundant here, but we have done a bunch of investments here, including the exterior access control at Westford Academy. And really the last piece of this that would need to come before town meeting and receive a vote is the classroom door issue that I discussed. So that's still in front of us and still part of the working plan. But really quite a lot is done, and I feel like at this point we can stand before the town and say, in the case of an event, we can communicate well, we can, and we've got much better, or soon we'll have much better access control to make sure that the right people are in the building, and people who used to work at Westford Academy 5 years ago don't still have a way to get in with an old key.
So Tom, can I just interject for 1 second? So
yeah, please.
I think it's important to know that a lot of those items that Tom just discussed are important whether we have a safety incident or not. These would be great just for a simple medical emergency. Now, you can't always, previously, you can always count on contact between EMS and dispatch, EMS and hospitals. So apart from any, potential security risk, we had to do this anyway, I think, just for the sake of our normal everyday safety in our schools. So just wanted to add that. It's a good investment to make.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. That's a good point. Along the way, we saw a bunch of things that created concern, and so I think we are able to solve a number of problems here. So the consultant and some of our work did, raise the question: would we be a better, safer, stronger community if we had more school resource officers? So this is very much part of the discussion that we'll be having internally and with the community. First, we want to just make sure people understand what many communities have school resource officers. Many of them have different mandates. So we just wanted to stop and talk about what they're doing in Westford. In past meetings, Bill Olson has done a nice job sort of explaining how Officer Detective Pavao fits into the fabric of the school, and by many in the school is considered an important resource for a bunch of different things. Our school SROs work on successful intervention with students, and I'll give a couple examples that they get pulled into. They assist in various kinds of training and education related to these important areas you see. For many students, they're a trusted adult. There are many other trusted adults in the school buildings, school nurses, guidance counselors, teachers. There are many administrators, and different students pursue different paths depending on how they feel and what relationships they have. So, for many students, Officer Detective Pavao has proven to be, the person that they will go to if they have a problem or a crisis. And then certainly emergency preparedness and training. Detective Pavao was really important in helping us do a lot of the survey work, really think about how to make the buildings more safe, think about how to make communications more seamless. So his eye, along with that of the chief, very, very valuable in helping us, think this through. In case people don't know, the whole way that the school, the sort of roles and the procedures that the SRO follows is governed by a memorandum of understanding with the schools. So the way that that the SRO in Westford interacts with students, reports information, the kinds of things that that they're pulled into, it's really governed by the Westford Public Schools. So it's in partnership with the schools that we're deciding what the SRO is doing. If Bill was here, I would ask him just to give a few comments about sort of how the Westford Academy leadership and Westford schools see that role and what parts of it they value. And so when we talk to the public, we'll have that. We did do the kind of benchmark study that you would expect. I just don't need to dwell on this, but just we did look at what other communities have. Again, every community has different needs. Westford has different needs and makes their own decisions, but just to just to give a flavor of what communities around us have been doing in terms of SRO presence. I won't go through all of this, but there is a substantial list of SRO programming that we do. This is a lot of the same programming. These are Detective Pabau's slides, so if you wish, Jeff, you can jump in. But this is sort of just a list of some of the programs that get supported. There are programs that are supported in other schools that we choose not to do or don't have resources to do, and we did look at that as well. But these are the kinds of things that that we ask our SROs to do. I want to give a couple examples of student-initiated reporting. These are the kinds of things that that may get brought to Officer Pabau, or Detective Pabau, may get brought to lots of other trusted adults too. So I'm not making a claim that any one group has an exclusive lock on being trusted by students, but these are the real things that have come to the SRO. You can see, typical would be in a private online social media group, a student will see something that concerns them about another student, and they'll bring that forward, and then sort of an appropriate intervention path will come from there. Lots of risks related to social media and sort of risky behavior with social media. And again, typically these are friends seeing a friend doing something and saying, wow, we need to get some help. And so in this case, Jeff was the first point of entry. A number of weapons issues, people posting weapons. We had an 8th grader recently that posted a really disturbing weapon video that a student saw and then referred to the SRO to look into. So wanting to stay on top of that and be able to react to it. And then sometimes kids do goofy stuff like trying to reproduce dumb stunts in town or in the schools. And in this case, that's the kind of thing the SRO would get brought into to provide assistance. So very much the question is both in terms of number and priority, where do we feel as a community additional SRO presence would be valuable. And just repeating that the consultants looking at our situation did recommend that there would be basically a coverage model where there would be one for each of the middle schools that would also support the elementary schools that feed that middle school, and then additional SRO at the Westford Academy where the needs are arguably greatest. So what I'll be working on with the chief and Detective Pabau is sort of a 3-phase look at this. So if we were going to add one, what would that look like? Where would it be added? How would that impact the life and success of Westford and schools? And then if we're going to add a second, what would that look like? And then if we're going to add a third, what would that look like? So when we talk to the public, we'll have these different options and a little bit of clarity about what we would be doing specifically if we just added one, if we added 2, or if we added 3. And then we'll sort of do the same thing we've done with others. We'll sort of paint a picture of what impact this would have, what would the life of the school or life of students be like. So we'll be preparing that and getting this in here as well before we present to the public. Cultural competence. So we did hear, throughout, we all are hearing from the world, but we heard through the consultant work that we did that it's just critical to be culturally aware. We have different population groups in town. They have different needs. They have different levels of familiarity and trust with town and school institutions. At different levels of willingness or comfort with raising their hand if they see a problem. So we want to make sure that that we're designing all of this, and when we're thinking about each of these steps, that we're doing it through the lens of how does this affect all the different populations in town. One fact that came out, which is one of many things, but interesting to me, is that students of color in Westford were twice as likely to not have a trusted adult at home or school. That's a little bit of a convoluted statement, but if the white kids had, something like 70–80% had access to a trusted adult at home or school if they had a problem or a concern, and students of color had a significantly lower, somewhere in the 60s, I believe, reporting that they had a trusted adult nearby. So just one example of how we need to be aware of the differences as we're designing all this curriculum. or not curriculum, but designing these possible approaches to town. For this one, I think, and this is very much a work in progress, I think what we would do is make sure in our outreach, the communication that we're talking about today going forward, that we purposefully reach out to diverse communities and make sure we get their input and hear their priorities. I think we want to support enhanced training on diversity, equity, inclusion. There's a committee sort of pending in development. I think we'd want to talk with them and see what work they're planning to do, and if there are ways we could get some value from observing part or participating in part, and just try to remind ourselves always to have diversity in all of our decision making. And again, I think we want to paint a picture of how this can look if we're more thoughtful about cultural competence. How does that affect? What's the difference that produces, and how does that affect all of us in the work that we're planning to do? And then the discussion is really, are there things that we've missed? Are there areas that the community has strong feelings about that we should sort of re-examine or include? And then in the end, the task and the hard task for us really, with all the community help we're seeking, is to prioritize this. So I imagine on the day that we make the recommendations to the various boards, we would say, we've broken this down into phase 1, which we think is most critical and most urgent. And then here's phase 2, which is definitely necessary, but we can imagine doing this in a later budget cycle, that kind of thing. So that's in the end, we're looking at these recommendation sets, other things that might come up, and then sort of presenting like a menu or an action plan in stages that's fallen out of our work. And then this is maybe slightly updated, so there's just a lot more information back here. A lot of it's from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. You may not have gotten this. I can send you out this version if you have it. But this was sort of the best of like most interesting data that is coming through the various presentations. So if you haven't seen it before, it's really interesting reading to go through. Okay, I'm going to go back to the Brady Bunch view. And Scott, anything that we should touch base on before we get into kind of recommendations and questions that the community might have?
No, I just think for those who are new to the group, we discussed at a prior meeting in terms of how we move forward. We do community first, probably several of them, before we go to the boards, because the first question you're going to get from any board is, what does the population think, right? So this is a discussion document that Tom's drafted that would facilitate that discussion. Certainly it's open to any comments from any member. I think about how we move forward now with the school of government has changed in terms of what we thought we had. This committee was formed even 6 months ago, and of course the budget's got more complicated too. So timing becomes now a problem just in terms of engaging people on this right now with other thoughts top of mind.
Thanks, Scott. And I'm just scanning the attendees. Mark Chambers probably should get promoted, and Paul Fox too, if we still have room. Mike, I don't know how many squares we can pack into this thing, but those are standing committee members. Okay, why don't I go? I see Jody. Why don't I do Jody, and then Anita, and then Carolyn, and then we'll keep going from there.
Thank you, Tom. I know Al Prescott wrote, but one of the major drivers of forming this committee was the Hartford somebody there. But and I don't want to lose sight of that, because the town meeting asked us what we were going to do to make sure our schools were safe. So that was one of the driving forces, and of course we focused on physical security and then mental wellness. But the other point I wanted to make, and I don't know if you know this, but it was actually my office that formed the Domestic Violence Committee years ago after the two very critical domestic violence incidences that occurred. And then the committee was so big and was doing so much, I wasn't able to continue with them as often as they were meeting, so I delegated that to the town nurse. That was Sandy Collins at that time, and Gail has taken that over. So there is a very direct town presence with that committee and support. So I just wanted to make sure you knew that, because that was many years ago. So that's it. Thank you.
That's a good point, Jody. So I think the context matters that this started in the wake of Parkland, and there are, the whole climate's changed, but there are a lot of people who still have real questions and concerns about safety of their kids in the building. I said I was going to go to Anita and Carolyn, but I see Augustina. Hi, Augustina. We earlier on just did a quick intro, just a two-sentence intro, just so people can put a name with a face. If you wouldn't mind, if you can just say hello and share what brings you to this committee.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me good?
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. My name is Augustina Garrett. I have been very much interested in what is going on in the community, not like I have been in the past. I do have 2 young children in Westford, and we have been living in Westford for about 6 years. It's important to me to know what's going on in school. I see Caroline Jeslow here. We've met at NAB. It's important to know what's going on in school, the welfare of the kids, and some of the things that we hear at home. I wasn't raised in America, so a lot of these racial disparities that we hear right now, I was not exposed to it. So I am learning what is going on. I've been in the United States for about 20 years, but our experiences are very different. So I can't claim to have the same experience as someone who was born and raised here. But my children are born and raised here. So I want to be involved in whatever it is that will be different from my background in school, in the community, and educate myself and be able to speak to whatever it is that I'm able to. So it's important for me to be part of, committees like this to understand what is going on in our community. So that is why I wanted to join, and I'm happy to be part of you guys.
Great, thank you. We're lucky to have you here.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go back, and people can whatever comments you have about gaps or needs. Why don't we just keep it open for now and see if we need to, maybe I'll wrap up at the end by going section by section just to see if there's anything we've missed there. Anita.
Yeah, I guess I had a question a little bit about if you're doing sort of a talking tour and when you're reaching out to these different populations. So like for the older adults and like people with disabilities, I know because of COVID, social isolation has really amplified depression. And so is that something, I assume that that's something that's going to come up, and that's not really addressed in the presentation. And I don't know if it would make sense to kind of split things up a little bit depending on who your population is and who your audience is, because I'm not sure if they would want to spend as much time on SROs as opposed to like, how do we handle social isolation and depression for older adults in our community if they're like 25% of our population, just a consideration.
Yeah, that's a great point. And just to make sure I've got it, so sort of the specific COVID-related impacts and how that's changing the needs.
Yeah, or just population-specific information, right? So if depression's an issue for older adults, then maybe that's what you're focusing on for that presentation for that group. And then if it's like school-aged kids or parents, then maybe, the SROs would make more sense there. I'm just offering that suggestion. I don't know.
That's a good suggestion, because if we try to make it everything for everybody in every meeting, it's going to be way too long. So, Carolyn?
Yeah. My first thought when you were talking about the behavioral health of, the adults and the children, it was immediately what popped into my head is the effects of the mitigation measures that were put in place for the COVID-19 pandemic. So I don't know that I'm quite sure that when this presentation was created, this clearly wasn't, something that was even on anybody's radar, but especially with the adult population, I feel like that's a trickle-down effect. Like the focus, we really do have to focus on the parents in the household. So, I mean, just something to keep in mind when, when we're presenting that. I'm sure that the community this is going to be foremost on people's minds.
Yeah, it's a good point. The presentation is written as a little bit deaf to COVID, which doesn't make sense. So we should make sure it brings that in more clearly. Sue.
I just had a couple of, on some of the slides. Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
Okay.
sorry. So on slides 8 and 13, just make sure you wrote down that there's 3 adjustment counselors at Westford Academy. Don't forget, there's an adjustment counselor at each middle school. And Carolyn, isn't there like a split one at the elementary level?
I think that we do have an adjustment counselor at the Abbott, but not all schools have an adjustment.
No, right. Well, no, we definitely have talked about the need for one, but there's nowhere that you mentioned that we actually already have an adjustment counselor at each middle school. So, you know, and I know, Tom, at a previous slide, when it really talked about the fact that we have adjustment counselors, guidance counselors, et cetera, it was listed there. But when you put it on these slides, so on slide 8 and 13, when you write, so slide 8 is potential approach, emotional wellness support in schools, and you have Westford has some resources in place at Westford Academy, but many, and then you say 3 adjustment counselors, but you don't have anything. I don't think we should say Westford has some resources in place at Westford Academy. It's not just at Westford Academy. We have supports at all of the schools, you know. So I think we got to be careful of that slide. And then also on 13, again, you talk about what we already have in place, and we have adjustment counselors at Westford Academy, but please add that we have them at other places as well. And I don't know if that would be a place to also put that you also have guidance counselors at all of these schools as well. And I would, as Jody had said, I would definitely bring in the fact that domestic violence group, but we also have a parent support group in town too. That might be a place to bring in about some of the resources that we already have.
Okay. Let me just making notes here. We did in earlier work, we did a kind of a map of what the resources are and where they are now, and maybe that would be helpful. Or let me ask the question, Sue. Would that be helpful just so people can see? Because people will know that we have guidance counselors, for example. So they may say, "What are we doing with all the resources we already have?" And I think we had a nice slide that said,
"Yeah,
here's
you did
in place." And so we do have them, and they're needed, but they're heavily taxed and not able to do some of the primary screening stuff.
I think that original slide that you had for other presentations was more, I think it's a better visual for parents. And, you know, and again, if we're doing this to the community, you want to make sure the community knows that we're not just focusing on Westford Academy or anyway. So.
Okay, good point. So we'll add that back in, because that is a question we all have. Like, well, what do we already have, and why can't they meet the need, basically? And we went through that and explained it, but
yeah.
Other comments that people have that they think? Why don't we do Christina, Omar, then Emily?
Thanks. So the only comment I kind of wanted to go back to the COVID comment, and while I think it's valid, I'm almost thinking we want to say that the system we're putting in place is going to be able to handle anything that comes up. Something else may come up in a year or two that we need to, I mean, hopefully not this big, but, you know, had we had this system in place a year ago, it would have been sort of mobilized, I'm assuming, to handle COVID. So I don't know that we specifically want to carve out, this is what we're doing for COVID, although it's not exactly what I mean, but I think we want this system to handle whatever comes up next, because there could be something else. I mean, 20 years ago, you know, nobody thought of school shootings. Then you've got the resiliency at the younger grades that's starting to crop up. Something else is going to crop up that the system's going to need to handle as far as social and emotional. So I think we sort of want to go maybe that route of explaining how this is going to work to people.
Okay, so talk about how various challenges, how we're doing this really to address a wide range of challenges, those we know and those we don't know.
Exactly.
Okay, thanks, Christina. Omar?
Yes. First of all, I mean, it's a great presentation. There is a lot of data, and it's hard to put everything together to build the thread and the framework in a way that is effective. When you talk about the stress, the high level of stress in the schools, are the causes of that stress identified? Because they would be important in assessing which solutions work best. And it goes back to the reactive versus proactive way of addressing things. You want to intervene for what's happening, but you also want to prevent more stress for the new students as they go through the pipeline. On what's missing, I was surprised both in the HMA material and in the presentation to see that there is no mention of gender-based violence beyond the domestic violence, which is usually gender-based, but in schools, for example. And the other thing is that in the HMA recommendations, there is a long list of programs in a toolkit, they call it, that do not seem to be highlighted. There may be summarized, but they do not seem to be highlighted and maybe broken down in the presentation, not even in the appendix. One minor thing is when we report the percentages, like for example, there was the percentage of people reporting excessive drinking. So you report the percentage of the people who are at risk. For the trusted adult in the presentation, HMA did the same. We do the opposite. It might make sense to report the percentage of people who report not having a trusted adult, as opposed to the other way around, because that's where the stress should be. And a more general question, this is a lot of stuff. Like the proposals are many, and with each proposal there is a price tag attached to it, and there is also a cost in terms of community and the benefit in terms of community. I wonder if there needs to be more work, and I wonder when the work has to happen to kind of assess, like there could be some interventions that are low cost and high benefit. And there may be some interventions that are high cost and maybe are low benefit for our community. They might make more sense for a different community and stuff like that. And if we do that work, then it's easier to discuss how to prioritize things without the perception bias that we all have, because there are things that we perceive as more dangerous than others, even though the data shows otherwise. And I wonder if that work needs to happen now or later, maybe after the community engagement and so on.
So a bunch of good points. We do have some information from surveys about what students report the drivers of stress are, and I can make sure that's available because that's at least in the appendix. I'll think a little bit more about gender-based violence and how we're highlighting that and addressing it. We can definitely include the HMA toolkit in the back and get more consistent on the percentages. Absolutely, at the time that we make the recommendations to committees, we will need to give a price tag and have some sort of budgetary estimate. And we might as well do that now. I don't know whether that would be central to the discussion, but I think adding that either in the presentation or the appendix, just so people have a sense, if we're talking about adding an adjustment counselor, what is that in terms of money? So I think that's a great idea to add, and then we can see how we want to highlight that, but definitely having it on hand is useful. So thanks, Omar. Emily?
Yeah, let's see. Omar mentioned the stress. I think it was 70% said it was school. And it struck me that certain problems were highlighted, but without really a solution. So, you know, if 70% of kids are being really stressed out by school, what are we going to do about that? I feel like that piece is missing. Another piece that I felt is missing is, okay, if there's a disparity in trusted adults for people of color, we need a specific plan to address that. I mean, I feel like we need to really focus on if we're hiring, adjustment counselors, can we prioritize diversity there? And I also wondered why it's not discussed that there might be like a diversity, equity, and inclusion coordinator position, or maybe a wellness coordinator position in the school that, you know, has DEI expertise, something along those lines. One more comment. This is sort of a small one, but on slide 4, you know, talking about cultural competence and highlights specific categories to the exclusion of some others. I think maybe the language could be modified there just to be a little bit more acknowledging of other categories, and also, you know, immigrants that are not, you know, American, I guess. I don't know. I just feel like the language could be a little bit more inclusive.
Emily, can you, I'm sorry, I was taking notes and listening at the same time. Which, is it a specific slide that you're recommending we change the language?
Slide 4, cultural competence.
Okay.
Let's see. Yeah, around minority population groups, including these. I just thought maybe adding, you know, immigrant community. I don't know, just like
okay.
you could look at the census to see some other categories that live in this town that maybe might want to be acknowledged there. The census data might help with that.
Okay, I think I understand. We review it and make sure that that someone reading this, all the different people in town reading this, feel like they're being heard. So not have it be such a limited number of groups.
Yeah, maybe just a broader category or something.
Yes. So good points. We do have a little bit more information on how different programming is designed to help deal with student stress, and I could you know, make sure that that's available so that it's not like we have a problem with no solution. We do have a bunch of in-school programming that is related to this. You know, maybe we need more, you know, more hours available for direct intervention, but we can certainly share some of the things that are going on now there. The sort of early on, when the whole sort of question about how's the town going to approach diversity, equity, and inclusion came up, we did think a little bit about how that intersects with our committee, and decided that while we need to have that be part of our thinking and acknowledge how different groups need different solutions out of this, we decided that really we wanted to leave the recommendation for, does the town need, you know, DEI resources and staff to this emerging committee? And so we thought about, is this something that this committee would do in terms of, is that within our remit? And we said, well, obviously really important for us to be aware of, but we probably would decide to leave that set of recommendations to the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, rather than this committee say, we're gonna expand our scope and make some specific recommendations there. So we've been thoughtful about it. I'm not sure we've, you know, 100%, you know, are always getting it right, but we did consider it and thought it belonged with a group that is composed of communities of color who can really teach us about, you know, how to listen better to their voices. And maybe this group wasn't that group wasn't in the best position to make those recommendations. Okay, other folks. Valerie.
Thanks, Emily, for bringing that up. That was one of my questions, was kind of how this will dovetail with the new group that at the community level that we're talking about. And I also just want, I mean, obviously new to the group, and have been listening in the last couple meetings, but maybe would just help me to have kind of a higher level view of, like, is the group of us kind of voting on these recommendations before this goes to these other committees, or are we kind of like this middleman between this outside consultant and assembling this and picking from that recommendation group about what works for Westford and then making those recommendations? Because I think, you know, a lot of those, you know, mental health, and there's a lot of things that are not controversial on here, but I'm just kind of thinking down the line about people might wonder who kind of approved these recommendations, or where they're coming from, or what kind of weight is behind them, I guess. So I'm just trying to look for that 10,000 foot view of what, like how we're kind of putting behind it? Sorry.
No, it's a good question. So we're going to make recommendations to the select board and the school committee about, you know, what actions do you think would be beneficial and how we prioritize them. And we will ultimately take a vote. This committee will take a vote and say, we voted 10-5 or unanimously or ends up around this recommendation set. Before that, though, we'll do this community engagement. So we feel like we've listened to people and really understood from all the different communities we're trying to serve, which has not been so much, we've always known we needed to do that, but we haven't done that yet. So a lot of the work that's been done so far that's turned into action has been, you know, a lot around the infrastructure, safety, sort of professional assessment type stuff. So we've always known we need to go to the community. But yes, ultimately, we've taken a vote and stand behind these recommendations after all the research, all the thinking about it, all the community conversation.
Okay, so then this slide is more of, here's what the consultant and Westford, what the data in Westford we think is kind of creating these recommendations, and then here, well, you want to hear what the community thinks about it, and then we would vote.
Exactly. We would, and it could be other things besides these. These were just the pieces of work that came out of different subcommittees so far. So,
okay.
So, you know, the SRO group worked with some of the schools and thought about, you know, what's here and talked to the consultant. Carrie led a group that looked at this mental health set of resources in the schools, largely school folks, but other folks were part of that too. So each of these little recommendation bundles kind of comes out of a subcommittee work that's been done over the last, I don't know, 6 months or so.
Thanks, that helps.
Scott?
Just a little bit of background. So items we've taken to town meeting so far were one-time expenses, we make the investment, it's done, and there's no ongoing tax implications. Anything looking at staffing, as we're discussing now, is a long-term cost. So that becomes more important to bring to the community. And secondly, or perhaps more importantly, you know, some of the technology investments or infrastructure investments were because of really holes in security. And we did not want to advertise to what the holes were until they were plugged. So again, we didn't go to the community with some of those. Now we're talking about really how to improve our current offerings. So that, I think, is what we do want to bring to the community. It's more appropriate. So that's sort of why there's been that distinction, the past versus the future.
Thanks, Scott. Andrea, I think I saw your hand.
You did. A couple of points. As we plan for how we're going to present this to the community after we've got our presentation done and, you know, sort of coordinated and everybody's on board with it, I do think we need to at some point talk about, you know, how are we going to present this to the community? You know, to whom are we going to? How many times are we going to do it? What is the presentation going to look like to the different groups, as Anita pointed out earlier on? You know, I think about back when we have done things like the master plan implementation committee and the master plan, and we did several presentations over a course of, you know, 4 to 6 weeks so that we could hit different groups and also offer them at different times so that, you know, folks who, you know, maybe can't attend an evening meeting, you know, you need to have a daytime meeting for folks, you know, who are attending at the daytime. You need to consider what the needs are for our senior community when we're going to be able to get the most input from them. So I think sort of a future discussion, Tom, is, you know, how we go about rolling out these recommendations and presenting it to the community. So that was my first point. And then my second point was, and again, it's the same point I keep making, is the schools are certainly an important part of this and a major part of this, but please, you know, we cannot forget about the rest of our community. We cannot forget about what their needs are, what recommendations would be to address the needs of our elders, our parents, you know, everyone in the community, our employees, you know, they are part of this community as well. They certainly have mental health and emotional needs, and we need to remember to address those. And when I look at the presentation, it seems to be heavy on the school side and missing on the town and the employee side. So I think we need to take a look at that as well.
Yeah, it's a great comment and one that you've made, which I appreciate.
I like.
Yeah,
I know I sound like a broken record.
No, we need to get it right, and it's. I think every time you bring it up, we try to tilt it to a more even balance, but maybe we're not there yet. Is your point? Carolyn.
Yeah, I clearly I'm always an advocate for the school, but I will echo with what Andrea just said, and you know that mental health and behavioral health of our older populations do impact the kids in school, so they're equally as important. Of course, you know, when we're dealing with kids on a day-to-day basis, it's heartbreaking when someone's in need, but I feel like, you know, a healthy adult, you know, helps children to develop healthy habits too. So just.
Okay, good point. We will continue to pursue getting this balance correct. I'm conscious of the time and how valuable your time is. I certainly want to answer any questions. If anyone else has any comments, let's definitely do that. But if I could give you a gentle assignment, it would be to think about questions that you think people would have if they were seeing this for the first time, information they'd want to have. We're not going to be able to do everything, but we can make sure we provide links to the more detailed reports. And I certainly want to be ready to field questions that we should all anticipate. So if you could please just think about that in between now and the next meeting and send me questions that you have, people you think we should talk to in the community in particular. And Andrew, to your point, we'll next time we'll talk a little bit about how we want to construct the roadshow, who we would like to make sure we deliberately reach out to, and sort of how we want to actually structure it, how many, when. But yeah, at the very least, I think all of the different population groups that are in town, we want to deliberately reach to and say, we really need to understand your view on this, and either please come and participate in one of these, or we could decide in some cases to do an event specific to them if we feel like you know, their needs are different enough that it wouldn't make sense to do it in a large group.
Hey, Tom, just
yep.
Thinking outside the box real quick, and Jeff Hillman, is it Hillam? Yeah, I would love to connect with you at some point. I was really struck when you said you're the president of the Lowell Interfaith Group. You know, when we're talking about bringing things to the community, and we're talking about finances and everything like that, let's face it, there are things that can maybe be done that wouldn't be costly. Okay, so there is something that was done in other towns is called iGrow, and it stands for Interfaith Teens Gathering Around Our Wellness. So Jeff, I would love to talk to you more about that kind of stuff. But, you know, when you talked, Tom, about, you know, other community members, the churches, you know, I mean, I do think we should be talking with our faith community because we, you know, there are other ways that kids and adults can be helped. And, you know, I know for me, my faith is a very strong part of my life and has gotten me through a lot with mental health. So I don't want to forget about that too when we're talking about how do we get buy-in. I think talking, you know, to some of the faith leaders might not be a bad idea at all.
That's a great point, Steve. Yep,
May I do a follow-up? You know, a lot of the communities of color in Westford don't have religious communities in town either. A lot of their religious communities are in Lowell or Lawrence or Billerica or elsewhere. You know, our religious institutions do not represent the spectrum of religion within our town borders. So I work with a lot of people even who live in Westford, but who worship in Lowell or elsewhere. So in terms of religious communities, it's an interesting mix.
Yeah, I think we want to be deliberate. I would imagine the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee is also going to want to be really deliberate to reach out to the imam or set of imams that serve the Muslim population in town, and set of rabbis that serve the Jewish population in town. And every time I've reached out to any of them, they've been delighted to talk. And so good points all, and we want to make sure we tap into that too. Okay, any other comments? I think what we'll do in terms of the next meeting is what we've done before. I want to talk to the school folks and see when they feel like they could engage in this again. I'd like to get some of the placeholder slides full before I use any more of your time. So I think it's going to be some number of weeks probably before we schedule the next meeting. And we'll ask Samantha to send out a doodle poll once we've sort of nailed down the week that we think both will have the content ready and the schools are in a position to join back in this meeting. Omar.
Yeah, sorry. Regarding what you just said, so is there, other than sending you notes and questions, is there any way we can help in the process before the next meeting?
Yeah, absolutely. I imagine that I'll get a bunch of questions and feedback. So if it sounds from your comments earlier like you're pretty comfortable with data and expressing data and communicating information. So if you're willing, Omar, I'll tap you to help, sort of pull together this round of input and get it into the document. Take all the help I can get. Yeah, Augustina?
Are the meetings always in the morning?
They have been. We could do it differently. The reason that we do it in the morning is because this committee has traditionally drawn pretty heavily on town staff. And so if we have a committee that's, for a while, this committee was probably half town staff, then we try to do it during their workday as early as we can. Okay. If there's a better time of day, though, especially now that we're entering this new phase, we could schedule this either earlier or we could do an evening meeting.
Okay.
Is that a better fit for you, Augustina?
Evenings are a better fit for me. I work from 8 to 5. But I'm fine with morning schedule as long as we know the time ahead of time. So if we get the schedule, what day is going to be, I can plan for my coverage at work.
Okay. Good, thank you. Scott?
One thing we need to think about is, I think the duration of COVID is going to impact our ability to have these meetings. It'll be mostly online. Mm-hmm. There's a real population who does not have online access. My own mother does not have internet, for example. So we need to think through how we do this. Certainly we can televise it on WCAT to get everyone on TV, but how do we get feedback from people if they're, on that way? So as we think about certain populations in town that we want to make sure we hear from, realize that the technology could be a barrier, and we need to think through how we're going to make that work through perhaps our senior center social workers, or however we help, broaden that audience.
Yeah, it's a good point, Scott, and a question we should definitely ask the senior center folks, because they would. I'm sure there are others too, but they would be familiar with who has access and who doesn't. Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time. It's much appreciated. I know there's a lot of challenges going on. There's a lot of fiscal challenges. I think we're in a pretty unknowable space in terms of what's going to happen with state aid, but we need to provide all kinds of services for people and the students and the schools. And so I know that this feels like it's sort of one more thing and a bunch of other high priorities, but I think if we can get a great, well thought out set of recommendations into the planning process, then we'll be able to make some real difference here. So it takes a while for us to do this preparatory work, but it's not going to happen fast. I would say it's going to happen probably over the course of a couple of years. Jody?
I just didn't know if the new members know that we have a lot of the reports we received on our website under the Town and School Safety Task Force. So if you don't know that, please go on that web page and you'll have links to all the reports that we've gotten and a lot of other information.
I have a question about that, because there seems to be material that the presentation draws from that is not available on the website, but I might be wrong. So maybe we can follow up offline if I find an instance where I think I cannot find the source of a piece of data, maybe you can tell me where to find it.
Yeah, please do that, Omar, because I think you're right. I think we've tried to put stuff up, but I'm not sure we've been as systematic about it as we might.
Okay, if we're missing anything, just let me know and we'll get it up there.
I think one of them might be the Health Management Associates report. Is there a full report or is there just a summary? Because I didn't see the.
I'll take a look. I think part 1 and part 2 are up there, but I will take a look and see. And there may have been an earlier report that was even longer. So if I can find some other materials, I'll Jody.
Was it in slide format or was it in like a report format? Because I saw the slides.
I think all their final reporting was in slide format.
Yep, yeah.
And then it's there. Thank you.
Christina, I saw your hand.
Just as far as the guidepost information, a lot of that was sort of confidential. So that's probably not on the website, or it shouldn't be.
Yeah, we could take a look at that again. A number of the risks they've identified we have dealt with, but probably not all of them. So they're not yet. Some of the work is still scheduled in front of us. So I can take a look at it and see if it seems like it's ready for public release.
Okay, yeah, no, I'm just
it might
not
be
even
yet.
maybe public release, but you know, the task force was given the full report, and so with new members, they may want that background.
Good point. Good point. So I can make sure that the new members get the guidepost reports. And Scott made the point earlier. It's I mean, there were some pretty scary holes that they pointed us to that we jumped on pretty quick. So in the beginning, we definitely did not want the report out there. Okay. Any other comments or questions before we adjourn for now? Okay, great. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate your time. Maybe entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
In a second? And all in favor? Okay, thanks, everybody. And we'll be in touch to schedule the next meeting probably in the next week or two.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Tom. Have a good day,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye, everyone.